So, the next cycle we have to talk about is the civilizational life cycle, often called the stages of empire. Now, different historians may assign a different number of stages to the cycle, but all certainly agree in the broad strokes. Empires rise and fall. How many stages or phases are in these cycles is really just a matter of nuance and gradation. But probably the most well-known model was devised by Sir John Glubb.
Yeah, Glubb was a British military officer, historian, and author of over 20 books, primarily covering the history of the Middle East. In his book, The Fate of Empires, published in 1978, he studied 11 different empires, from the ancient Assyrians to the British, and noticed some striking patterns.
Yeah.
One thing he noted was that the average lifespan of an empire is about 10 generations, or roughly 250 years.
Yeah, but he also noted that each of these empires went through 7 stages in their rise and fall. The ages of outburst, conquest, commerce, affluence, intellect, decadence, and finally, collapse.
Yeah, he outlined each of these stages and the characteristics associated with them, and like Solomon, he found there was truly nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Every empire succumbs to the same fate and follows a pretty predictable pattern. The age of decadence, he noted, was, among other things, characterized by an influx of foreigners, the breakdown of unifying customs, and a return to tribalism, the rise of the welfare state, the loss of the sense of duty, a shift toward materialism, and moral decay due to the weakening of religion in society.
Wow. And while there's much debate about the exact date, virtually everyone agrees that America is in decadence. And we've checked every box, we've crossed every T, we've dotted every I with gusto. But I want to key in on just one aspect of this pattern of decadence, as it seems to be the primary indicator and driver. That's sexuality. Now, to understand just how catastrophic the decay of traditional morality is in society, we need to mention 2 more scholars, J.D. Unwin and Camille Paglia.
Yeah, right. So J.D. Unwin was an anthropologist from Cambridge and Oxford in the early 1900s who decided to test Sigmund Freud's theory about sexual repression in society. Now, Freud had posited that complete sexual freedom was the most beneficial, and that therefore the more any society restrained or regulated sex, the more detrimental to humanity and that society it would be.
Wow.
So Unwin set out to prove Freud right. After studying 80 societies and 6 civilizations, publishing his findings in a book titled Sex and Culture in 1934, though, he came to the exact opposite conclusion.
That's right. He found that strict monogamy and strict prenuptial chastity were by far the most advantageous for both humanity and society.
Yeah.
In fact, he discovered that any deviation from these sexual constraints caused societies to begin to unravel, and if not corrected within 3 generations, would cause catastrophic damage, including the loss of deism, loss of social energy and output, and even the loss of rationalism. Of course, America shifted from these sexual constraints 3 generations ago during the societal awakening phase, which brought about the sexual revolution.
Yeah. It seems once you permit a little bit of sexual freedom, it just opens the floodgates. Society then becomes more and more sexually deviant, focusing ever-increasing social energy on selfish desires and gratification, and away from family building and productive behavior and activity. This ultimately becomes unsustainable for any society as the sexual deviance compounds over time until virtually all sexual restraint is abandoned, and society implodes on itself with the family unit decimated.
Wow. And which brings us to Camille Paglia's equally groundbreaking research. Published in 1990, this book titled Sexual Persona once again studied civilizations from the ancient to the modern, but this time focusing on the age of decadence. What Paglia found was that in each and every civilization, the last straw before their collapse was the acceptance and proliferation of homosexuality and transgender identities. This is the final stop to the sexual freedom train to nowhere and the end of the line for any society right before it goes completely off the rails.
Yeah, and the resulting train wreck is well documented.
Yeah.
It should also be noted that neither Unwin nor Paglia were religious prudes.
Yeah, that's right.
Unwin was a Freudian, and Paglia is both an atheist and a lesbian, so there can be no accusation of confirmation bias in their conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. But through the research, we see one of the initial seeds of destruction sown during the awakening by straying from strict monogamy and chastity. And then we see see the ultimate fruit of that seed in the crisis, where society is so licentious and undisciplined that it abandons rationalism in favor of narcissism and hedonism, even to the point of questioning the biological realities of sex.
Yeah, and as people become so absorbed in their sexual identity and indulge in their appetites, they increasingly lose the sense of duty, self-discipline, and self-sacrifice necessary for marital commitment and the raising of healthy families. This eventually sounds the death knell of the society, as broken families produce more and more broken children, if any children at all. This in turn produces more and more dysfunctional members of society, increasing crime and poverty, which increases society's dependence on government and the welfare state, while simultaneously decreasing the tax base necessary to prop up such a broken system.
Wow. Yeah, actually, I want to go back to what you mentioned there, a comment you made about society, if they even want to or even value having children at all. Obviously, every civilization requires future generations in order to sustain itself. So child rearing and the nuclear family are the bedrock of any healthy society. In fact, historical studies have shown that the birth rate must stay above an average of 2.11 children per woman, called the replacement rate, in order for a culture to survive. If it dips below that threshold for more than a single generation, about 25 years, the culture is doomed to collapse due to cold, hard mathematical realities.
Yeah, and due to the sexual revolution during our last awakening, the family unit disintegrated. Divorce and abortion rates skyrocketed and birth rates plummeted. In 1960, near the end of our last societal high, our birth rate was at a healthy 3.65. That fell to 2.27 by 1971, right before Roe v. Wade, which was the last time we were above the replacement rate, over 50 years ago. The numbers were trending slightly upward, peaking at 2.11 in 2007, but since we entered our crisis in 2008, they have been on a steep downward trajectory, with the current numbers at a historic low of 1.64.
It turns out it's difficult to maintain a minimum required birth rate when you kill over 62 million of your own children. That averages out to around 1.3 million babies per year since Roe v. Wade legalized abortion. To put that number into perspective, if you would add up all the wartime deaths in all of American history, including the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, both World Wars, Vietnam, and the conflicts in the Middle East, that totals about 1.1 million deaths. America kills more babies every year than war has in nearly 250 years.
Yeah, unfortunately, all this degeneracy adds up, and decadence has lethal consequences. As the historian Will Durant once said, a great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself from within. His contemporary, the revered historian Arnold Toynbee, agreed, saying, civilizations aren't murdered, they commit suicide.
Hey, I'm Josh.
I'm Joshua.
Thanks for watching, and we hope the 5th installment of this series gave you a good understanding of the 6th stage of civilization.
Join us in the next segment as we discuss some of the ideologies Americans are embracing, which are hastening the 7th stage, collapse.